So when I last read, we were introduced to the boy, Edward, who Alice came across and sort of took under her wing and sent him to the manor. He's a little boy who was a lot like her and also insecure like her at the time that she was found. And we saw her character develop. Remember how I talked about dynamic characters as opposed to static? So, an evolving character, a character who changes significantly, that's Alice. When you look at the way she stood up for the boy and she stood up to those mean bullies and scared them away, whereas before she would be tormented by those boys and run away and hide. So her character has certainly developed to a point where she is able to help someone else. Chapter 11, The Leaving. Interesting title. And instantly, this makes me think that Alice will be leaving the midwife. What else could it be? Unless it has to do with the boy, but the boy, she sent him up to the manor, and that was that. Let's see. Alice was sitting by the fire one cool November morning, tying up birch twigs for a broom, when a pounding came at the door. Jane opened the door to Matthew Blunt, whose mother was about to have another baby and wanted Alice to come and help. "By the bones of St. Polycarp, who's Alice?" bellowed the midwife. The boy jerked his head toward Alice. "Her? Your apprentice. My mom said Alice helped her sister Joan, the bailiff's wife, when no one else could, and so she will have no one but Alice." "Her? The dung beetle?" The midwife quivered in disbelief. "You're asking for her, who knows nothing and fears to try and does only what little I bid her, and that none too well." She cracked Alice on the cheek. "My mum will have no other," repeated the boy. The midwife looked a bit like a mad dog as she spat and spluttered and tried to get words out past all the anger in her mouth. "Go then, Alice! Such treachery, such thievery, eating my bread and stealing my mother's. Go!" When she began to throw cooking pots their way, Alice and the boy lit out and ran all the way to Adam Blunt's cottage. Alice stood outside for a minute, surprised at having been asked for and not knowing whether to be pleased, until the boy nudged and pushed her to the door. She wiped her hair from her eyes, licked her lips, and went in. The cottage was warm, and Emma Blunt even warmer. What with her efforts to have this baby and be done with it? Alice rubbed and crooned and fussed, as she had with the bailiff's wife. She fed Emma on raspberry leaf tea and comfrey wine. She built up the fire, closed all the windows, and 3 times called the baby forth. Then she sent Matthew to search for birthwort root, put out the fire, birthwort root, put out the fire, and open all the windows. But the baby would not come, as if he were holding tight to his mother, reluctant to be separate and alone. And Alice, although able to ease a willing baby into the world, had no idea how to encourage a reluctant one. So as the day passed from morning to midday, and Emma tossed on her tumble linen, and still there was no sign of a baby, Alice, doubtful and uncertain without the midwife, or at least Will Russet to tell her what to do, and unwilling to get herself or Emma into trouble, stood back from the bed and said, "I cannot do." She washed Emma's face, smoothed her wet hair, took a deep breath, and sent Matthew back to the cottage for the midwife. Emma and the unborn baby tested from the morning struggle, so all was quiet until the midwife roared in like wind before rain, blasting everyone out of her way as she set about attending to mother and babe. She insulted and encouraged, pushed and poked, brewed and stewed and remedied. Anointing her hands with cornmeal and oil, she rubbed and kneaded, pulled and tugged, and turned that baby from both the inside and the outside, until finally he was in a position to come out. Then she slapped Emma's great bulge of a belly, lifted her from behind her shoulders, and gave her a good shake. All was chaos, noise and heat and blood, until finally, over the tumult, Alice could hear the cries of a baby, the moans of a tired mother, and the laughter of the triumphant midwife. Alice backed out of the cottage, then turned and ran up the path to the road. She didn't know why or where. Behind her in the cottage was disappointment and failure. The midwife had used no magic. She had delivered that baby with work and skill, not magic spells. And Alice should have been able to do it, but could not. She had failed. Strange sensations tickled her throat, but she didn't cry, for she didn't know how, and a heavy weight sat in her chest. But she did not moan or wail, for she had never learned to give voice to what was inside her. She knew only to run away. So it was that on a crisp, sunny, Martinmas afternoon, while the villagers slaughtered their cattle and pigs for winter meat, while Maggie Miller stirred a sheep's blood pudding for supper, while Will Russet and Dick gathered beech and oak and ash and chestnut for winter fires, while Alneth the Saxton cleaned the manor privies and cursed God for making him a peasant and not a lord, while the boy Edward ate a bowl of herring soup and thought of a warm corner in the manor kitchen that was to be his, while Emma the bailiff's wife's sister kissed her new son on his tiny red nose and fell asleep with him at her breast. While the life of the village went on, Alice turned her back on all that she knew and that had come to be dear to her, and headed up the road from the village to she knew not where, and the cat went with her. Okay, so she ran away again. And the next chapter says the inn. And again, all of the chapters begin with the. I think there may be one that doesn't, and we'll come upon that later. Oh, there are a couple that don't. Chapter 12, the inn. The cat was hungry. He pushed at the lumpish weight that was holding him down, spitting and scratching until Alice shifted and he could crawl out to see what creatures there were about that were good to eat and easy to catch. His exertions woke Alice, and she sat up and looked about her. At first she made to stretch and smile and face a fine new day. Then she remembered. It was afternoon. She was a failure, and she had run away. It was beginning to rain, and she faced a night outside alone in the wet. She curled up again into a wet, soggy ball. "I'm nothing," she whispered to herself. "I have nothing, I can do nothing, and learn nothing. I belong nowhere. I am too stupid to be a midwife's apprentice and too tired to wander again. I should just lie here in the rain until I die." And she fell again into a dreamless sleep. And here's another turning point. It almost makes it look like she's going back to square one. But once somebody grows the way that she has grown and has learned what she has learned, even though she doesn't know it, she probably won't go back to being homeless. She's changed, forever changed, even though she's reverted to feeling the way she felt at the beginning of the story. So this is another turning point, and we'll have to see where this takes her. But the next morning, her young body, now used to a roof and warm food on cold mornings, pricked and pained her until she awoke. It was still raining, and she was still a homeless failure. She stood up, picked some of the leaves from her hair, wiped her drippy nose on her sleeve, and looked around. She knew where she was. Behind her was a village. Emma, the midwife, the failure. She couldn't go back there. She could not stay here in the rain waiting to die, for she was too cold and hungry and uncomfortable and alive. So she went on ahead. The cat stalked behind, stomach empty and feet wet, but unwilling to let Alice go on without him. An hour's walk brought them to the crossroads, where the road from the village met the road to the sea. And there Alice could see, through the wet November dawn, a light. Whenever I think of a crossroads, I think of, um, where are you going to go? Are you going to go straight? Are you going to turn? This is sort of a metaphoric thing, depending on where she goes on those crossroads. One thing could happen or another. Your life could change drastically based on your decision on where to go. It was an inn. Alice had never been in such a place where anyone could find a bed or dinner provided he had the coins. Alice didn't have coins, but she had two strong hands and an empty belly to fill, and she was soon at work in the kitchen, trading her labor for bread and a bed out of the rain. Purr made himself useful, keeping mice from the barley and tasting everyone's cheese. The inn was really no more than a large stone cottage with a room over the big kitchen, a loft above the stable, and tables in the hall good for sleeping on or under. The innkeeper was called John Dark, for he was nearly sightless. Oh, and everyone was named during those times. Most people were named based on what they do or based on something about them. So he was called John Dark because he was almost blind. But none so blind. Nope, it's okay. So I'm just going to back it up. I think I was at most work about the inn was done by his wife, the round and rosy Jeanette, who could carve a fowl with one hand, turn cream into butter with the other, and still have one left over to hoist a noisy yes by the shirt front and chuck him out the door. So it sounds like the wife does everything. Oskins, Boskins, chickadee, Jeanette said next day to Alice. You are such a help to me that I would you would stay on a while. Alice had nowhere to go, so she stayed, grateful that she'd found work she was not too stupid to do, even if it was only scouring the tables with river sand or skinning an eel for a pie. Alice worked hard and lived mostly on beans, bread, and Jeanette's bad beer. Each week the autumn grew colder and wetter, and the inn, although dirty and drafty, was much cozier than any bam or dung heap to be found outside. So she remained, empty of heart. She wouldn't think about her months in the village or Will Russet or the bailiff's Joan or the midwife, for such thinking brought the tickling in her throat again. But sometimes the smell of garbage or of apples baking would make the village so alive in her mind that she would look up quickly, certain she had been magically taken back there again, and her eyes would blink in hope and dread. Sometimes, too, she thought of the boy she'd sent to the manor, and wondered how he fared, and if she had at least done that right. Oh, the tickling in her throat. That's a feeling that you're going to cry. But we remember that she's never really been taught to express emotions or... Soon it was Christmas, and the inn teemed with folks going away or coming home. That word teemed was in Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. Teeming with people, lots and lots of people. Alice hung holly and ivy from the charred beams in the hall. Musicians with their rebecks and guitarns and sackbuts came to drink and stayed to play. Ducks and geese on great skewers were turned in the roaring fire until they were golden and juicy and so fragrant that the cat and the mice came in from the stables hoping for a bite or two. It was all colorful and warm, but Alice enjoyed none of it. Her heart heavy, her eyes blank, and her mouth as tight as a hazelnut, she went about the business of Christmas as if she was mucking out a stable, muttering over and over to herself, I am nothing, I have nothing, belong nowhere. Oh. January dawned frosty and gray and stayed that way, and Alice stayed too. Just before gray January turned into black February, she noted a thin brown-coated back, hunched over a table close to the fire, and relaxed. She'd seen that same brown-coated back for weeks now, hunched in the same way over the same table before the same fire. Alice began to watch the man, not knowing he had long watched her, and wondered what could so blight a person so young. Blight means like blight, something really bad happening, hurt, you know. He was long and skinny as a heron, with black eyes and a face that looked sad, kindly, hungry, and cold. She thought at first he had the pox, for his long face, long nose, and long yellow teeth were all spotted, but it proved to be only ink, splattered as he pushed his quill pen furiously along. Corpus bones, she thought, he's writing. This is a man who can write. She kept her eyes down as she served him his bread and ale, barely daring even to breathe the same air. She, who was too stupid to be a midwife's apprentice. A writer at that time was very highly thought of. While they watched the big sow drop 7 piglets one dark afternoon, Jeanette told Alice about the brown-coated man. Magister Reese, it was said, was a renowned scholar. That means an educated man, well known. Renowned means so well known. Staying at the inn for the winter, he was working off his room and board by keeping accounts and penning letters for guests. While he finished writing what was rumored to be a great and holy book. Alice studied the man. She noticed that John Dark liked to sit near him, for he was careless of his ale. That Jeanette made sure to give him the smallest portion or the toughest meat, for he ate what he was given and never complained. That he never scolded Tam the kitchen boy, who had been kicked by a horse and was not right in the head, even when Tam spilled beer or bacon fat on his papers. And that only the geese seemed awed by him, scattering hurry-scurry when he entered the inn yard, lest any other tail feather go for a quill pen. Oh, so quail feathers or tail feathers is what would make a quill pen. So if they were scattering hurry-scurry, they were probably nervous, the geese, that he would take their feathers for pens. Alice took to sweeping the corner of the floor more carefully and scrubbing that end of the table more frequently, hoping to see what he was writing and what it might look like, for her curiosity overcame at last even her bleak despair. After a while, he tried to speak to her, but she would only clutch tighter to her broom and sweep furiously in silence. So instead, he took to talking to the cat. "This, puss," he said, shifting the sleeping animal off the page he was writing, "is my masterwork, an encyclopedic compendium I call the Great Mirror of the Universe, wherein you can find reflected all of the world's knowledge, collected by myself, Magister Richard Reese, M.A., and dedicated to His Ampleness the Bishop of Chester. So called, for he is ample in all the world's virtues. Or, see how I can make the ink blacker by mixing soot with the boiled oak galls? Or, this cat is a P, as in puss or pork or plum pudding. Or, the letter S must be made just so, never thick or wiggly, or with an extra curve at the end, but just so." Is he teaching the cat? It sounds like he's teaching the cat, but I think he has something better in mind. The cat listened carefully, although sometimes he lost patience with the tutoring and began to bite at the tantalizingly moving pen. And Alice, too, listened, so that she learned some letters as a cat learned. She liked best the O and the D and the G, for they looked friendly. Z seemed mean, X wicked, and W always made her yawn. Q was by far the most beautiful, she thought, even if it could not stand alone and must be accompanied everywhere by the compliant U. So this child is learning to write. Sometimes at night, when the cat's belly was full and he had no need to prowl about looking for supper, he let Alice cuddle him against her as they went to sleep and tell him more about what she had learned that day. How A began Alice and apple and ark, when to put a tail on the S, and what letters might be made to spell purr. Even though he must, she thought, know these things as well as she. During the day, when not boiling or sweeping or chopping or skinning, she wrote letters in the frost on the wood pile with a twig, scraped them into the soot of the chimney wall with the handle of the broom, and stuck her finger in the mutton soup and wrote them on the table in the kitchen. At night, she found them written in the stars in the clear, cold sky. Once Alice knew all the letters and a number of combinations, Magister Reese began teaching the cat words, reading aloud bits of wisdom from his great encyclopedia. As a result, Alice heard about the heavenly planets circling the earth in hollow, transparent spheres, about the great empire of the Romans that once stretched all the way to Britain, about the faraway island of giant ants who walk upright and mine for gold. She learned about the 4 humors that govern the body, how to plant corn by moonlight, and where the antipodes are. And still, he had not said a word to her. So he's talking to the cats. He says, I just have to back up because this is quite humorous. During those times, it was believed that, and you guys learned about this in science, that Earth was the center of the universe. That was called the geocentric theory, the theory that the Earth was in the center and all of the planets revolved around the Earth. So that's what it says. It says, as a result, Alice heard about the heavenly planets circling the Earth in hollow, transparent spheres. So that was prior to us knowing that the sun was actually the center of the universe and all of the planets circle the sun. When one day he threw away a page he had ruined with an ink blot, Alice snatched it up and stuffed the stiff vellum into her bodice. Each night before she blew out the last candle, she would labor over the page, picking out letters and sometimes even words that were familiar to her. One showery afternoon, when raindrops sparkled like fairy dew on the new green leaves, Magister Reef sat dreaming over his mug of Jeanette's thin, bitter ale. Winter was nearly over and his book far from finished. What was he to do next? Should he stay or go? What do I want to do? He asked himself. Spying Alice sweeping her way toward him, he asked her, what do I want? And then, pointedly, and what, in-girl, do you want? Alice stopped still. She thought just to sweep away, but the shock of his addressing her directly was lost in that intriguing question. What did she want? No one had ever asked her that, and she took it most seriously. What do I, Alice the in-girl, want? She chewed on a lock of her hair to help her think. What did people want? Blackberry pie? New shoes? A snug cottage and a bit of land. She thought all that wet afternoon, and finally, as she served Magister Reese's cold beef and bread supper, she cleared her throat a time or two and then softly answered, I know what I want. A full belly, a contented heart, and a place in the world. Wow. Such an insightful answer, such a beautiful answer. Not greedy, not selfish, not asking for too much. Magister Reese looked at her in surprise. You ask a lot for an in-girl. I thought you'd say a sweetheart or a yellow ribbon for your black hair. No, this is what I want. But it's my misfortune instead to be hungry, out of humor, and too stupid to be a midwife's apprentice. None too stupid, he said. You can read as well as a cat. Alice smiled. And so winter turned to spring.